Joining me today is a New York Times best-selling author, a presidential fellow at Chapman University, the founder of Skeptic magazine, and now a four-time Rubin Report guest. Michael Shermer, welcome back to the Rubin Report.
That's right, my fourth time here.
Four times.
I don't know if that's a record or what.
You are close. You're definitely in the top 2 or 3.
Oh, cool. All right.
Depending on how this goes.
Do I get a pay bump yet?
No, but there's plenty of booze behind
okay,
you.
that's right. That? Yeah, that's right.
So, all right, there's a ton I want to talk to you about. You've got a new book coming out. I was saying to you right before you started, you're the only guest that has 2 books.
Oh, right.
In the Rubin Report library here.
The Moral Arc Skeptic. Okay, good. Well,
you are doing well.
we can bump the Skeptic and put Heavens on Earth there.
I'll
concede to that.
Yeah, okay, all right, we'll do that.
Because I hate to be the lifeboat guy that kicks the other person off the out of the lifeboat.
Fair enough. All right, we will swap those two. I thought a fun way, though, to start this conversation with you would be to tell a little story that happened to us both when we spoke at University of Arizona about 2 or 3 months ago. We were speaking there with, who were we with that night? We were with Steve Simpson.
Yes.
From the Ayn Rand Institute. And we were just doing a talk on free speech, about an hour talk, half-hour or so Q&A. And in the middle, I jokingly said to the audience, by a show of hands, are there any Nazis here?
That's right.
And to our surprise, someone raised their hand, a woman raised her hand and said that she was a Nazi. And she started to ask a question. I said, you know what, hang tight, respect our free speech, we're going to do our thing. But then when we open this up to the Q&A, we're going to throw the first question to you. So this person then proceeded to ask a question. Can you paraphrase what the question was, basically?
Oh, well, it was something about, she had encountered me before at some public event about the Holocaust story, and some details about the gas chambers, and one of these kind of technical arguments that they come up with that are supposed to stump Holocaust historians, but that I've refuted before, and then she wanted to revisit that.
So basically, it was she was a Holocaust denier, and the beauty of what happened, and why I wanted to start this conversation with this anecdote, was she asked you this question about the doors at Auschwitz and why they didn't lock and all of this stuff.
Sorry, it was Matt. That's right, the doors at Mauthausen. Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
And basically, you gave her a great answer of why the doors didn't lock, and they didn't want to scare people with doors that lock at an obviously very scary place and all this stuff, and it was a really nice moment for free speech, I thought. She actually respected our free speech. We then allowed her to have the question. You then answered her question. Now, it was pretty obvious to me that you didn't change her mind at the end. And that's the first question I want to ask. When you come by, as someone that debunks conspiracy theories all the time and created Skeptic magazine, when you come across these people that are so sort of tightly held to their conspiracy theories or the ideas that they can't prove, but they just believe them.
Right.
How often can you actually break through to them?
You can, actually. I get letters all the time. I don't have a data set from 25 years with 10,000 subjects or anything like that, but I get a ton of letters just from people saying, I used to believe X and now I believe Y. I changed my mind after reading your book, or you and Dawkins or Harris or Hitchens, or whatever. There's sort of a list of people that we know. And so I do think this idea that you can't talk somebody out of something that they didn't, you can't reason somebody out of a belief they didn't reason their way into, I think is not true. Even though probably they didn't reason their way into the belief in the first place, once you have the belief in place, then you find reasons to believe it, and smart people are really good at this. Educated, well-versed people can pile up the arguments and data in favor of their belief and ignore the disconfirming evidence, the confirmation bias. So, but you can do that. You can, and now there's studies on this by cognitive psychologists. Like, if you're teaching critical thinking and the students believe this, how do you get them from there to there? Whatever it is, ESP or UFOs, conspiracies, or some political economic idea. So you can do this by not standing at the blackboard yammering away, but by getting them to debate and engage with each other. Like, okay, so you're pro-choice, okay? You're now going to argue the pro-life position against this person here who's going to take the opposite position to what they believe. And that sort of forces them to think, well, okay, what are the arguments in favor of this? Now I got to make them. And then that forces them to listen to the other person and think about that. And then they really have a sense of what's the best arguments, because they have to make them. So really it's just engaging in a process. It's like you're not going to learn to play the violin by reading a book about violins or listening to a lecture about how the violin works. you got to just do it.
In your years of doing this, have you learned anything about the mind of the type of people that are prone to conspiracy theories? Is there like a certain set of ideas that they more broadly subscribe to before it gets to whatever the conspiracy theory might be?
Yeah, so there's kind of a global cognitive style that everything happens for a reason. Now, for religious people, this is, Jesus or God is sort of directing things, everything from the parking spot you got to the college you went into, your spouse that you met, and so forth, the little to the big questions. For the conspiracists, it's the government. It's a little g, God, government,
right.
That's pulling the strings, and even if it's if it's the Illuminati or the One World or whoever, the Rockefellers, the Rothschilds, it's still kind of a government type. That there's somebody up there pulling the strings, so that everything that happens for a reason. So, and we know that from surveys that people that tick the box that JFK was assassinated by a conspiracy are also more likely to tick the box that Princess Diana was murdered. Elvis is still alive. The aliens are being hidden in Area 51. So they go down the path. They tend to accept more and more ideas. Now we might call that a gullibility tendency or something like that, but there's something beneath that, which is everything has a reason for why it happens, and that they downplay the role of chance and randomness.
So it's interesting how you relate that to the religious mind, because there's a desire really to understand what's happening, and yet in the desire, I think you would argue that you then have to take a lot of things that aren't true for fact. Like there's sort of no ending to it, right?
That's right.
They never get to the end of the conspiracy theory and then it's exposed, really. It just sort of takes you further and further down the rabbit.
It's like an X-Files series of, it's like one episode leads to the next and they keep pulling the strings, the thread, and then it keeps unraveling forever.
So it's really a self-fulfilling prophecy in a way, right? If you can never be proven wrong because you hold
That's
these
right,
beliefs
yes. So I was just debating just online for the UFO people about this new story about the Pentagon had this program to study UFOs. Now they call them unidentified aerial phenomenon, UAPs. Sounds more technical and not as goofy. But of course, they're interested in unidentified aerial something or other, because it could be the Russians or the Chinese or who knows what. So it's perfectly reasonable to also then understand that, well, the governments, they lied to us. Yeah, no kidding. Governments do lie to their citizens.
Right.
But a good counter to this is, the WikiLeaks. Here we have, millions of documents that were secret, that we weren't supposed to see, and now we see them. And there's nothing in there about 9/11 was an inside job, the alien bodies are being held at Area 51, the UFO was engineering, technology was back engineered, and this is how we got the space shuttle. Nothing like that. So and this is a good example
that
of
they've released yet.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Well, but presumably, the WikiLeaks guys weren't, hiding the good stuff and releasing only because they released, millions of documents. So this is an example of the absence of evidence is evidence of absence in terms of that argument. Usually that doesn't hold water, but in this case, I think it does.
So where are you, just sort of personally? Are you feeling good about the state of skepticism at the moment, or are you feeling that fake news and the authoritarian control on both sides these days, just that everything's so up in the air? Do you feel good about what it is that you do and what the things that you care
I know
about?
It seems like we're not supposed to in the era of Trump and all this stuff, but really things just keep grinding along in a positive fashion. The counter to the fake news and alternative facts are all the new fact-checking sites like PolitiFact, and Snopes has gotten huge now. And at Skeptic, we're going to launch a fact-checking site because this is the kind of thing we should be doing. And there's, I don't know, there's half a dozen of those sites. So every political speech now given is followed by really clickbait tweets on, here are the 27 facts that are wrong in this speech. Oh, boom, I want to see what they are.
Yeah.
So really, that's the market counter to that, not censorship or we need laws about fake news. No, we just need people fact-checking. Yeah. And then when you get nailed.
But is the inherent problem with even that people go to those sites and then even if you fact-check it, they still don't believe the facts that they don't like? Like we've really run that to the ground, sort of.
Maybe, but on the other hand, the moment like postmodernists or even like behavioral economists say that, we are incapable of reason, what are your arguments and reasons for that statement? And the moment they open their mouth, they've refuted themselves.
Right.
Because we still use arguments and reason. Even if your arguments or your data are fake or questionable, you're still trying to make a good argument. So that Enlightenment program of we use science and reason to make political progress is still in place.
Yeah, well, that concept I think is really interesting because you have all these people right now who think either, the Armageddon's coming tomorrow or everything's never been worse. I think we hear that all the time.
Yeah.
We've never hated each other more, blah, blah, blah. And I'm pretty sure it was the first time I had you on the show and we were talking about the moral arc, which is right over there, that you were saying that the arc of progress has bent so that actually things are better. But it seems like we don't really stop and smell the roses these days. That seems like
right,
the bigger problem
right.
to me at the moment.
And when something does get exposed as, here's this evil in society that now we're alerting to, like the Me Too movement and some of the other ones that have happened in the last year or so, that just exposes how far we've come and how sensitized our moral compass is to things that are really bad, and that we're going to jump on it and not allow this anymore. So if anything, and like with the stuff we've talked about with the student protests, complaining about Halloween costumes. Okay, this is actually a sign of progress. I mean, no one worried about Halloween costumes in the 1950s, right?
Right.
The moral crusaders like Martin Luther King weren't, oh, what are the Halloween costumes? They're worried about, the KKK costumes that are real. Mm-hmm. Okay, so that's how far we've come when it can be so finely tuned that we're going to pick these little nits over here.
Does that also show you why the level of hysteria maybe is ramped up so much? Because the less stuff there is to really fight about. Not that there isn't some stuff, but the less stuff that really we don't. This isn't the 1950s KKK. It's maybe a couple losers with a truck. But that's why the people that scream about it have to scream louder, because they sort of need it in a
I think
way.
so. Yeah, and the fact is, say students at colleges like at Evergreen, they have their moral modules ramped up to 11, like any of us do on a cause we believe in. It's just that from a bigger picture, when you look at, well, what are you all ramped up about? Why is your moral module dialed to 11 over this silly little thing here? Well, they don't know what it used to be like, half a century ago. They weren't even alive. So they have the issues they're concerned about, but they have the same moral modules everybody else has.
So what do you make of the state of education in general? I mean, everything we talk about, everything you've written all these books about, really, it's based in educating some people first about some basic stuff.
It's still the most important thing we can do. I don't think higher education is going to disappear. I don't think brick and mortar universities are going to disappear. I think there'll just be more options, online options, say. All these MOOC courses and teaching company courses and audio books and podcasts and so on. These are just more avenues for dispersing information and ideas and discussing them. I think that's just going to continue, and along with standard educational things. Now, again, I mentioned earlier about the professor standing at the blackboard yammering away for hours while the students are on there. Now they're just on social media, not even listening. Okay, so that's what has to change. I think professors, teachers need to get more engaged. I'm a professor. I know this is harder to do. It's easy once you've got the lectures written, you got the PowerPoint set up, you just walk in, boom, and you're off and running. 50 minutes later, you're done and you're off having your coffee. Okay. It takes more preparation to think about, okay, how am I going to get these students to engage in this subject in a way that they'll actually get something out of it? And that takes more work.
So I think you gave me an example already, but tell me a little bit about how you prepare. So you're teaching Skepticism 101 at Chapman. From everything I know about Chapman, who's the dean that I heard speak?
Daniele Strupa, I think, is the president now.
He's the president, yeah. So I heard him speak a couple months ago in Dallas at an event, and it was an absolutely wonderful defense of free speech, of Enlightenment values, of what academia is supposed to be.
That's right.
And I wanted to say hi to him after and mention that you've been on my show a couple times, but so it seems like you guys are doing something right over there. Is that fair to say?
They are, yes, absolutely. They are not a politically left or right university. They're just open to ideas. The fact that they have statues of civil rights champions like Martin Luther King, but also economic freedom champions like Hayek and von Mises, there on campus. Others might think, oh, this is a right-wing, libertarian nut job. No, actually, I had my students one semester for their research project do try to sample the faculty on their political beliefs. Now, I talked to Daniele about this, and he and the administration are not allowed to do this. They can't ask professors what their political persuasions are. But the students can just, just sort of email, take my little survey. And it was pretty centrist. There was still, a slight leaning toward the left. I don't know where you'd put it on the scale, but left leaning. But by Berkeley or Evergreen standards, this would be right wing, alt right, nut job campus.
Right.
But really, they're just kind of centrist. And I actually think there's probably a little bit of a bias that you and I have been subject to, in the sense that we focus on the evergreens and the Middlebury incidences because they do stand out. And we forget all the, so Evergreen has like 4,000 students.
Right.
There was maybe 200 involved in the whole Brett Weinstein thing. All right, what were the other 3,800 doing? They were probably holed up in their dorm rooms. They don't want to get involved. They're not interested. They just want to study.
But my fear with them is that it's a little bit of intellectual hostage taking. That, yes, you might be right. The large bulk of them may not care about this or may think it's silly or whatever. But I think there's a huge percentage, I don't know what the percentage is, that are just afraid to speak because of this. Because every time I speak at colleges, that's what they ask me in the Q&As. What can I don't want to get kicked out of college, I get kicked out of my fraternity, have my professor flunk me, all that. That there is this feeling of that. I don't know that anyone's done the numbers on that.
I've never seen numbers on that. That would be a good question. Hard to get the data. Self-report data, and it's hard to get people to be honest about that sort of thing. But let's say it's 50-50. Half don't care, half do care and keeping their mouths shut. Every semester I ask my students, how many of you self-censor because you're afraid to say something like the politically correct language or whatever? And most of them raise their hand. Yes, they do some self-censoring. So for sure that happens. But I was encouraged by the Reed College incident, where the Humanities 101 was protested. It's too white male, Shakespeare and Greeks and Romans. And then finally some black students, said, get out, I want to get my education. I'm paying $50,000 a year. Yeah. And it's like, good, all right, so fighting back.
What do you think it makes the audacity of an 18-year-old to get up? I mean, I watched that video. People can find it on YouTube. I mean, I think the class was about the history of Greeks who have given us almost every value, that logic and reason that we have right now. Yeah. And talking about how it's white supremacist and all the usual nonsense. But to me, it was like those kids who get up and do this. It's not like the level of self-importance is so off the charts that you dare. It's not even what you're doing to yourself. It's what you're doing to all of these other people who paid to go to school. And you think you're wiser than the professors and administrators and all that. It's really
we do have research on this from social psychology for decades now, that you only need a few Confederates, people that will just go along with you. No, Confederate's not the right word. That's what experimenters put somebody in there. But affiliate, somebody that will stand with you. Like in the Milgram experiments, if there's somebody else in the room with you that says, wait a minute, I don't think we should be shocking this guy, then the actual subject will not go as far on the shock things. And same thing with the line length, Solomon Asch's famous one. Here's 3 lines. Here's one line, and pick the one that matches it, and everybody in the room says it's this one over here. It clearly doesn't match. And most of the subjects go along with the group. But if you have one other in the room that picks the right link line, then almost everybody does pick the right. So you only need 1 or 2 affiliates, just somebody to stand with you. And it's just sort of common knowledge that, like the emperor has no clothes. If somebody would just say it, maybe 2 or 3 people would say it, then everybody else who already knows what the truth is, then they have the courage to say it. If there's not punishment for it. So fascistic regimes and communist regimes have always kept a check on that by punishing dissenters, which is why free speech is so important. But also whistleblowing. We have to protect whistleblowers. We have to protect, and in a way, like with virtue signaling, we need to signal to the people that are willing to stand up. You get moral points for what you just did.
Yeah. Well, I think that's why I've tried to be part of this conversation at some level, but also talk to all of these people. So when this happened with Brett Weinstein or Laura Kipnis or Lindsay Shepard or Jordan Peterson, et cetera, I offered them that chair because I want people to see.
Yes, that's right.
As Douglas Murray said to me when I asked him, people think you're so brave, you talk about all of this stuff and the crumbling of the West and all this. Yeah. And I said, well, what makes you so brave? And he said, well, something to the effect of, in his great British accent, the water isn't so cold when you actually get in. And I think that's what it is.
That's a good way to put it.
We sort of imagine that if you start saying what you think, horrible things are going to happen. But in most cases, I think they don't.
Yeah, so I mean, like the Lindsay Shepherd, she's a complete nobody. Who's ever heard of her? Boom! Now she's like this sensational star of freedom and liberty and free speech, and the same thing with Jordan Peterson. I know he has a lot of enemies, but boy, he's got a lot of followers. My God, it's just huge. And so I think there's more people on that side. They haven't been as loud. The other side has a bigger voice because negativity always trumps positivity. It's like I talk about in the book. People hate to lose more than they like to win. It's that behavioral economics loss aversion. Losses hurt twice as much as gains feel good. Our brains are tuned to negative things for very good reasons. That evolution and the life before the modern world was a dangerous place. There's a lot of things that could take you out, and very few things that make life better. So it's better to focus on the negative things that can take you out, and then just sort of accept the good days as they come. But you don't have to pay that much attention to it. So the negative tweets in social media, they always stand out, which is why you just don't read them. Yeah, it's hard not to. But
so is this sort of the theory behind, I guess, every local news broadcast in the history of the world, right? It's just fire here, murder here.
Yes. Yeah.
And they're
doing
accident.
it for. I mean, that's their task to do that. That's okay.
Yeah.
We just have to remind ourselves that is not representative of the way life is.
How can we change our brains to think differently then? Because I think a lot of people want that right now. I think there's an exhaustion with the outrage. I think there's an exhaustion with hating each other and all that. And I think that's why what we're doing in this broader group of people is trying to make some sense. I think that's why it's working.
We just have to make our voices louder and just remind people, there are lots of sources to go to show how good life. Just reading one in your green room of a site that had the 99 best things that happened in 2017 that made it the best year in the history of humanity. It was like a long title, like the 99, oh my God. I started scanning down, I was like, oh yeah, I forgot about that. Last February, this really cool thing happened. Boom, 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 boom. And even I'm a super optimist and I pay attention to stuff. I didn't know half the things on this list. Like, oh yeah, wow, okay, so here we go.
Yeah.
And people like you and Pinker, and Matt Ridley, who, track the what's that site? Our World in Data, humanprogress.org, I think, or .com, Human Progress. And this is all they do is track this stuff. Poverty will be extinguished by 2030, maybe sooner. The Gates Foundation posts all this stuff, the work they're doing to eradicate disease in Africa, specific target, which is why, I rail against utopia in this book. Instead of aiming for, like, in 1,000 years, we're going to have a perfect world. Forget that. Just try to eradicate this particular disease in the next 10 years in that country right there. That's it. Yeah.
All right, we're going to dive deep into this book, but let's just do a little bit more before then. You said you're an optimist. How does a skeptic become an optimist?
Well, this may just be temperament. I'm just sort of a happy fellow, and I just tend to see the world fairly optimistically. I'm not sure why. That could just be, the behavior genetic stuff. Half of our temperament is heritable. Just got it from my parents. So, and I do tend to, Steve Jobs had that reality distortion field he talked about. No, Steve, we can't program this in by next month. Yes, we can, and you will. These are not the drones you're looking for. I will get it programmed, but yes, that's right. I have a little bit of that, not to that extent. That can be a little dangerous, like I'm going to ignore the cancer and just, no, there's some things you shouldn't ignore. But for the most part, when I get up, it's like everybody else is like, what am I going to do today? And I don't feel all that motivated, and then I just sort of get going, and then I tend to perceive things that could be negative in a positive way. Sometimes I have to sort of force myself. I do follow people on Twitter, for example, that are pretty positive, like Pinker or like Jocko Willink. He tweets every morning his workout. I've started. You see his watch, 4:30. Right. Oh, a.m. Yeah, a.m. All right. So then I think, okay, you know what? I can do this. Come on. And so I tend to distort reality a little bit. We do know from research on entrepreneurs and other people that it's good to be a little on the optimistic side versus pessimistic side. Now, you don't want to have the over-optimism bias. The entrepreneurs that think I can succeed no matter what, and they just keep plowing money into a failed business, that's not good. And of course, we only hear about the Steve Jobses of the world. Here's the model: drop out of college, move back to your parents' house, and start a startup in the garage, and you'll be a billionaire. Right. Actually, there's a lot of people that did that in the 70s, and no one writes biographies of them because they went out of business.
Yeah, there's a lot of pissed parents with old kids in the basement right now.
Yeah. So there's too much of that, but too much negativity makes you feel what's called learned helplessness. Like there's nothing I could do. I mean, we got Trump. Trump, and we got the economy, and the North Korea, Syria. Oh, it's all lost. What's the point? I can't do anything. I'm just one person. And then you just kind of sink. You're like, there's nothing to do. And that's not good either.
So as an optimist and a skeptic, regardless of how much of this was just built in your DNA, how much do you think is sort of the right amount of news to take in? Because I think that's
Yes,
people are also
yes.
dealing with that now. You know, and it's sometimes people say, well, Dave, why don't you do a daily show? Right? We could do this 5 days a week.
Yep.
And my feeling generally, beyond that, I don't even know that the economic part makes sense to us, is that I think there's a limit to how much people should be talking about
I do too.
politics all the time.
Dave, you could have a Twitter feed screen right here and sit here 24/7. It would never end.
Literally sounds like my worst nightmare.
Hold on, look what happened now.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's too much. I'm a consumer of content. I do tend to prefer the kind of long form essays, you know, the old New Yorker, Atlantic styles, and I still read those, but now there's a lot of good sites like this Aeon, A-E-O-N site, Quillette in Australia. They have these 3,000 to 5,000 word essays. They're great. That's the kind of content I like. I do sometimes slip over into just the daily stuff, and I find if I don't stop, I'm sliding down in my optimism. It's like, oh God, what can I do? It's just, Shermer, stop, just get off, close the laptop.
You're pretty good about it though, because I don't see you fighting with that many people online, although every now and again I've seen you get into something with another academic somewhere, and I've opened the door. I can't even remember the woman's name. It's not even that important unless you want to specifically talk about it, but you got into something with some woman about postmodernism, and I said, hey, let's talk about it. Come on the show. And then she immediately said something that is basically that you're a sexist and I'm impartial and the usual nonsense.
Well, you know, I'm 63, right? So I'm not, super engaged because I'm slightly older. Although I did get into the social media enough because I could see this is kind of where the conversation is shifting, you know, from books and, you know, public lectures to online content, and I like it, but I'm not obsessed about it. You know, people that are maybe in their 20s, that maybe they just can't. You hear about this, you know, addicted to social media, addicted to your phone. It's like, really? But I could see how it happens. You get the little dopamine hit every time you scroll through and you see your name on there. And
do you think that amount of information at our fingertips also feeds into why people believe in conspiracy theories?
Well, it's just more available. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So like maybe 25 years ago, it would have been harder for the 9/11 truthers to get a toehold, whatever the equivalent of that would have been, the Watergate inside job or whatever, because they didn't have a platform. That everyone's a publisher now, and you can just have your own web page. It looks like a magazine or whatever, and that they would have been harder to find. They're available. I mean, you could find stuff, but you know, it's more like ersatz publishing, or you put leaflets on car windshields, or you go to lectures and say stuff. Now it's too easily available. But on the other hand, so are the counter pages that can debunk them. Yeah, that part's good.
So I want to talk a little bit about your politics specifically, because you took the political compass test a couple months ago.
Well, yeah.
And you posted your results online, and then I took it maybe a day or two after. We were pretty damn close.
Yeah.
I was like, all right, that's good, because I like Shermer. He seemed sane to me.
Yeah.
Okay, and basically we both came out sort of center right.
Yeah.
So, as you know, I've tried for a long time to reform the left, and I think this has left me as a liberal to be right in the odd ways that things change over time. What do you even consider yourself at this point? I know you kind of said you were a libertarian the first time I had you on.
Yes. Well, I bought your T-shirt.
Yeah, you were wearing the classical liberal T-shirt.
Classical liberal, I think maybe is the right phrase now. The libertarian label has gotten a lot of baggage over the years. It's collected a lot of stuff from people on the fringes. You know, oh, so you don't believe in any government? No, and that's not what I believe. Or you're like Rand Paul or Ron Paul or you're Ayn Rand, or they pluck these people out, and it's a cognitive shortcut, a heuristic in which I don't have to actually talk to you about anything. I already know what you think. Mm-hmm. So I don't like that. It's like, well, okay, don't ask me what my political affiliation is. Ask me my position on abortion, gun control, death penalty, and so on, and I'll tell you what I think, why I think it, and then we can go from there. Yeah. But of course, who has time to do all that? So we like the labels.
Yeah, but let's do one of those, because I had Ben Shapiro on last week, and we had a really, I think, interesting, honest, sort of painful at some level discussion about abortion. It's one of the most difficult topics to talk about. We never in mainstream media see it discussed honestly, really, that I see anyway. And basically my argument was that I'm pro-choice, but at basically 20 weeks where they've been proven that at that point the fetus can feel pain, that at that point I think you probably could say, all right, you can't have an abortion, but then that leads to all sorts of other questions, which is, does the state have to have a responsibility, which I don't like that.
Right.
Anyway, Ben is pro-life. You sent me a very brief email with your thoughts on this, so let's
well, I was watching that live, which is great, and so I just sent that. It was an article about, from Aeon actually, about the history of infanticide in our species. You know, lots of species do this, and evolutionary biologists have studied this for a century. Why would, in a Darwinian model, why would a parent kill an offspring? That's their DNA. Well, it depends on the calculation of resources available for how many you can bring to reproductive age. That is RS, reproductive success of a species, is defined by how much of your genes get into the future genome of the species going forward. So if you are R-selected species, you have, like salmon, you have 10 million eggs, and 100 of them make it to the top of the stream, and they're the ones that succeed. If you're an elephant or a primate, you have 2 or 3, and you put all of your resources into those. And so these are different reproductive strategies. And in our species, what's happened over all the way up until really well into the 20th century, until the introduction of birth control, women just killed their babies after they were born. And it sounds cruel, but it's just a basic triage decision to make. I can't feed any more kids. When you live in really any time before the 20th century, it was pretty impoverished compared to today's standards, which is what we're used to. You just can't have that many kids. They're just going to starve to death or whatever. And, in lots of societies, anthropologists tell us, like these Inuits, they just leave the kid out there, and if he survives, then for 2 days, then we'll bring him in and make him a part of our family. If not, out. Spartans did this. Lots of societies did, not because they were immoral. Presumably they feel grief about it, but they just can't do it. So, one argument among many.
Wait, well, is there a moral argument there, though? Is it not that they're not immoral?
Well,
is
so
there
that's
something?
Yeah, this is a hard question. Okay, so I'm making the argument that practically speaking, if you restrict women's ability to control their family size, they're going to do it anyway. Okay. You say, okay, you can't have an abortion. Well, we're just going to get more trash can babies, more babies, infants left in the park. Now, that's not a pure moral argument. Ben would say something like, oh, so you're saying murder is fine before or after birth? No, I'm just telling you historically, this is what happens. Now, the ideal solution would be more prosperity for women, more control over their reproductive choices, more control over their family size, and so on, access to abortion if you need it. But we do know from studies that abortion rates go down when women have, more political power, more economic freedom, and especially access to birth control technologies. And so religion has traditionally restricted those, and that leads to more abortions, or in other cases, more infanticide. So that's one angle I come at it. That's not. It's really more of a practical, historical angle than a purely moral one.
Right. So that you really just give me the realist explanation.
Yes, it's a realist. Right? Yeah. Okay. Now, morally. Okay, so with these difficult questions, we have competing moral dilemmas, or competing moral positions, and they're going to conflict with one another. So you have the rights of the fetus, the rights of the woman. Okay, so there's not one right answer. So if you say, well, you should be a utilitarian or you should be a Kantian, this will tell you what you should do, but those aren't necessarily absolutely right across the board. No one could be a pure utilitarian or a pure Kantian or Aristotelian virtue ethics. None of them work across the board. You can always find some exception, which is why we still have these elaborate ethical debates, because it's not solvable. So you have the state should have some say over whether citizens murder each other or not, and they should be able to implement punishments that are appropriate. So death penalty. Yeah, but there's all these other sides. So you have these conflicting. So how do we resolve it? Debate, votes, laws that get changed, legislation that changes. And it's hard because there's not one clearly right answer.
So I suspect that you thought my argument was actually pretty decent then, right?
Against Ben?
Yeah.
Absolutely, of course, 100%. I'm a pro-choice. I forget exactly the way you said it, barely.
Yeah.
Or, you know, just,
but that basically at 20 weeks, that's sort of
20 weeks, yes,
because then it gets, you're right, it gets caught in now, okay, well, if you believe it's a life at 18 weeks and at 20 weeks. So where are we, you know, drawing these lines all the time?
You have to draw the line somewhere. Frozen embryos, you know, there's millions of them now.
Yeah.
Why are they not life on Ben's? You know, we have the moment there's fertilization, that's a life.
Yeah.
Okay, that's true. That's it's a potential human life. Now there's the question of personhood, slightly different because a person has legal rights under the Constitution of the particular country, and that's a slightly different question than a biological question. But either way, by Ben's argument, once the fertilization happens, that's a human life. Okay, yeah, it's potential human life. So killing the embryos is also wrong. I don't know what he'd say about that. Actually, I haven't heard his position, but I'd say it's a continuum. And the problem, the difference between the law and science is that science deals in continuums and gray areas and shades and nuance. The law, by definition, has to just say, okay, this is the law. We draw the line, you know, on this day of this month. That's it. No abortions after that are legal. And I'm okay with that. It's, you know, life is messy. We have to draw the line somewhere.
Yeah. All right. So one more thing before we get to the book. So I think one of the best things that I did, or that I was part of last year, was the debate that we had here with you and Dennis Prager about God and morality.
Right.
And obviously you took the position that you do not need God or a higher power to be moral. Dennis took the opposite position. So two questions on this. So first, when we finished that, I sort of, my brain basically, and most of my being basically agrees with your argument, that I don't think my morality purely comes from believing in God, or that most people's, you know, that you can figure out a way to be moral. The interesting part of the conversation came down to this micro versus macro argument, where basically Dennis was saying to you, well, you, Michael, on the micro level, you as an individual can be very moral, and I have no doubt that you're a very moral person. I'm basically paraphrasing him, but that at a societal level, somehow the man-made morals that you prescribe to can't tie a society together in the long term, so that we need these Judeo-Christian values, which then allow the Enlightenment to happen, to then have morals for a society. I suspect you don't agree with that. We got into it a little bit, but I just wanted to kick it to you without someone else.
Yes, well, Hitch dealt with this in his book, God is Not Great, and he even cites Prager. He said, I was on Prager's show once, and he guessed this question, you know, of course you personally could be moral, but, you know, as a society, wouldn't you rather walk down the street at 3 in the morning in a dark alley in a society that was, you know, more religious than less religious? And Hitch promptly rattled off cities he had walked around at 3 in the morning after drinking that he did that were very religious. He was not at all feeling comfortable or safe. You know? And he had them by name and you know, year and so on. It's like, yes, okay, that's right. You know, at what point in history? I mean, most Judeo-Christian countries centuries ago were not safe places where you could be burned as a heretic if you have the wrong beliefs about the king or whatever. It didn't matter what your religious beliefs are. These were your fellow Christians killing you, and all the way up to World War I. You know, Christian Germans killing French Christians. Did I say that right? Yes. Anyway, so
that was the correct order of killing. Yes.
Now, but even so, that argument is really more of a pragmatic kind of utilitarian argument, that whether or not there's a God or religion is true or not, believing in it, this is what Dan Dennett calls belief in belief. You know, I don't believe, but I think people need to believe. There are some people that make that argument. A lot of atheists make that argument. It's sort of a condescending way of looking at your fellow citizens. You know, I don't need it. I can be moral, but these morons, you know, they got to have the little policeman in the head, or they're going to kill each other. And in a way, the founding fathers sort of, Jefferson and these people talked about that. You know, more in a deistic way. You know, if we're going to have a kind of self-organized, self-policing society, we can't get the state out there to those Western states, which was like Ohio at the time. You know, it'd be good if people believed in moral values. So they really believed in an education and moral education as well. And I think that's true. But what's happened is that we've inculcated those beliefs into our own beliefs without the need of religion anymore, or without the need of an eye in the sky watching us, because we're kind of watching each other. And so I think, to go one more step for Dennis, he needs to say that it actually needs to be a supernatural implementation of a moral sense into human cognition. And I think that is what he believes. God gave us our morals. So of course I had counters on that, which we talked about. But ultimately, he still needs that supernatural dropping in, because we can show that societies can learn to be better and moral just with secular law and order.
Yeah, I like that you brought the founders into it, because, as I say all the time, I go to DC every couple months probably at this point, and I go to all of the monuments and all that. And when you read these things, especially Jefferson, it's like this guy was talking about church and state, the separation, the necessity for church and state to be separate, while at the same time was basically acknowledging some sort of higher power. How much he believed in it is, I think, a little unclear.
Yeah.
But that then led to all of the values that freed us. So, it's interesting.
And it's long ago enough that, we're used to talking in language that doesn't include God talk. At that time, there were virtually no atheists. No one was talking about, it's okay not to believe in God. I mean, there's a famous story about Hume coming to somebody's dinner at the Enlightenment time. You have like Adam Smith and all these now famous people. And, Hume says, well, I don't know any atheists. And it's like, you have a room full of them here. It's like, really? Oh my God.
Right.
Yeah, now you and I, well, of course, we live in LA, and California is a little more liberal.
We're in the most godless place known to man.
Yeah, so, it's not a big deal. But I think more and more it's becoming more acceptable, and therefore where do morals come from? Well, we talk about the secular values enshrined in the Constitution and the law and order of our society, Western society, expand to include Europe and so on. And all of a sudden you have, the fastest growing group are the nuns, the non-religious people. Okay, there's going to be a third, maybe a half of the world in a few decades, maybe. Where are they going to get their morals? Well, we know where they're going to get them, where we get them from.
Do you think you can live a full life while still splitting the difference on these two positions? Because I think a lot of people are like that, and I think sometimes I even fall into that, where I can, when I sit around so many people that are really smart, that make compelling arguments, and I can understand their lines of thinking, and I think that sometimes I can go to those different places in different ways. Yeah. Do you think you can live like a full, complete life without ever fully getting to an answer that satisfies you on that?
I think so. I mean, like everybody else, I would prefer to have definitive answers. I often have to remind myself, it's what I always say, it's okay not to know. But I'm not always comfortable with that. It'd be nice to know. But really, by temperament, again, I think I'm just of that scientific mindset of it's okay to just have this question. And the more I study morals, particularly when I was writing the Moral Arc, and now I'm getting ready to teach this honors course at Chapman on morality and ethics and evolution. So I'm rereading all these debates about abortion, capital punishment. We have a textbook we're using that here's the best argument for abortion, here's the best argument against abortion, and so on. And it's like, okay, yeah, these are really good arguments on both sides. And it's like these ethics and moral seminars, where the professor's driving you down these like a Peter Singer kind of thing, like, is it okay to sacrifice children, that are mentally retarded? It's like, what? But when you actually listen to the argument, it's okay. It's not clear at all which is the right moral position here. And so recently I was just writing about utilitarianism, because this is a popular idea now. It's like, wait, there's some really big flaws with you. Well, then what? Will you like Kantian, the categorical imperative? No, that has flaws. What about Aristotle's, virtue ethic? No, that has flaws. They all have flaws.
Yeah.
Okay. All I can think of is it's something like this, that the analogy I used in a paper I wrote, my moral manifesto, that when Kepler discovered that planets travel in ellipses and not circles, he could never, no one could have discovered something else if they're doing their sums right and they're actually making accurate measurements, because that's what orbits actually travel in. I think human societies are just many degrees of freedom more complicated, and that we're not going to discover the answer to these moral dilemmas, but it's not like postmodernism. There is no moral truth.
Yeah.
Maybe there's 6. The planets have these 6 variations of planetary orbit. So humans, have like utilitarianism, Kantian ethics, and so on. I think we've kind of figured out, a few basic principles, like you have to consider the other person's position. John Rawls's veil of ignorance. Like when you, Dave Rubin, are going to write a law, you have to do it as if you might be, a black woman. Okay, all right. In that case, I'm not going to write it to favor white males. You know, in fact, I better write it so that everybody gets treated equally under this law I'm about to write. Okay, that's super basic, but it really works.
Yeah.
In terms of fairness, by just asking somebody else, how would you feel if this law were passed and you were the one affected by it? They'll tell you, right? So that principle that we have to think about that when we're legislating, you know, that's one of those. Again, so there's maybe in the last couple thousand years, maybe half a dozen of these kind of moral positions. And you can see how they've sorted themselves out. And there are not many new ones that come up, you know, try this, try that. And they, you know, they either take hold or they don't because they work in terms of like improving humanity a little bit.
Well, now I know why I'm so close to you on the political scale, because I love that answer, and that's the spirit that I try to bring to the show every week.
I would love to say I'm pro-choice and those guys are absolutely 100% wrong. Like Ben Shapiro, I know why he's wrong. No, actually, I don't. I think I can out-argue him just slightly. But at some point, here's my arguments, they're good. Here's his arguments, they're also pretty good. All right, so we just decide.